Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In the early 1970s, Washington, D.C. was paralyzed with fear as 6 young African-American girls vanished from their neighborhoods, only to be found murdered along the city's highways. The killer, dubbed the Freeway Phantom, left behind haunting clues, including forced phone calls from one victim and a chilling note written by another before her death. Despite one of the largest manhunts in DC history, the Phantom's identity remains unknown to this day. Join me as we unravel this disturbing cold case that continues to haunt our nation's capital 50 years later. In the early 1970s, Washington, D.C. was gripped by a series of horrific crimes that would leave an indelible mark on the city's history. Between April 1971 and September 1972, 6 young African-American girls, ranging in age from 10 to 18, were abducted, murdered, and their bodies discarded along highways in the D.C. metropolitan area. The perpetrator would come to be known as the Freeway Phantom, and to this day, their identity remains unknown. Our story begins on April 25, 1971, when 13-year-old Carol Spinks left her home to buy groceries at a 7-Eleven store just a half-mile away on Wheeler Road. The short walk should have taken only minutes, and Carol successfully made her purchase. But she never made it home. 6 days later, her body was discovered along Interstate 295, about 1,500 feet south of Suitland Parkway. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The community was stunned, but this was only the beginning. Less than 3 months later, on July 8, 1971, 16-year-old Darlenia Johnson disappeared while walking to her summer job at Oxon Hill Recreation Center. Her body was found 11 days later, just 15 feet from where Carol Spinks had been discovered. Like Carol, Darlenia had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The third victim was 10-year-old Brenda Crockett. On July 27, 1971, she was sent to the store by her mother to buy food for dinner. What makes Brenda's case particularly haunting are the phone calls that followed her disappearance. The first call came to her family home, where Brenda's sister answered. Brenda was crying and said a white man had picked her up and that she was sick. When asked where she was, she said she thought she was in Virginia. Before hanging up, she said, "Bye," in a way that her sister would later describe as unusually final. A second call came shortly after, this time answered by Brenda's mother's boyfriend. Brenda again said she was somewhere in Virginia, adding that she had been given something to eat. She then said, "Oh, I see a sign that says," before the call abruptly ended. These would be the last words anyone would hear from her. The next day, Brenda's body was found along U.S. Route 50 in Prince George's County, Maryland. The killer's pattern was becoming clear. Young African-American girls, taken while running errands or traveling to and from everyday activities. The murders were methodical, with the bodies left along major highways, earning the unknown killer their ominous moniker, the Freeway Phantom. The fourth victim was 12-year-old Nenemoshia Yates. On October 1, 1971, she disappeared while walking home from a Safeway store. Her body was found just hours later along Pennsylvania Avenue in Prince George's County. Like the others, she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The fifth murder marked a shift in the killer's pattern. Brenda Woodard, 18, was last seen alive on November 15, 1971, waiting for a bus in downtown D.C. Her body was discovered several hours later along Route 202 in Prince George's County. But this time, the killer left a message. Tucked in Brenda's coat pocket was a note, written on white paper, believed to have been dictated to Brenda before her death. It read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." The note was a crucial piece of evidence, showing not only the killer's awareness of their nickname, but also suggesting a level of interaction with their victims before their deaths. Forensic analysis revealed that the handwriting matched Brenda's, indicating she had been forced to write her own death note. The final known victim was Diane Williams, 17, who disappeared on September 5, 1972, after visiting her boyfriend. Her body was found the next day along Interstate 295, just south of the district line. Like the others, she had been strangled. The investigation into these murders was massive, involving multiple jurisdictions including the Metropolitan Police Department, Prince George's County Police, and the FBI. Investigators noted several consistent elements across the crimes. All victims were young African American females. Most were abducted while walking alone. All were sexually assaulted, and all were strangled. The bodies were all left along major highways, usually within the same general area. Law enforcement developed several theories and leads. One significant lead involved a green car that had been spotted near several of the abduction sites. Witnesses described seeing a similar vehicle, possibly a Volkswagen or Chevrolet, in multiple instances, but this lead never materialized into anything concrete. Another theory centered on a potential connection to law enforcement or security personnel. The killer's ability to move freely throughout the area without arousing suspicion, combined with their knowledge of secluded spots along major highways, suggested someone familiar with the region and possibly with police procedures. The investigation would also reveal that several of the victims had been fed before their deaths, suggesting they were held for some time before being murdered. This detail, combined with the phone calls made by Brenda Crockett, painted a picture of a killer who maintained some level of control and interaction with their victims before killing them. The investigation took a significant turn when detectives began looking into a group of men known as the Green Vega Rapists. This group, which included Edward Sullivan, Michael Jefferson, Tommy Simmons, and John Davis, had been terrorizing the Washington, D.C. area with a series of rapes committed from their green Chevrolet Vega. The similarities in the vehicle description and the geographic area of their crimes made them persons of interest in the Freeway Phantom murders. The connection seemed particularly promising when investigators discovered that some members of the group had worked as security guards, which aligned with the theory that the Phantom might have law enforcement or security experience. Moreover, they had committed their crimes in areas overlapping with the Phantom murders, and their known attacks had also targeted young African American women. In 1974, while in custody for their rape convictions, both Edward Sullivan and Michael Jefferson were questioned extensively about the Freeway Phantom murders. Sullivan, in particular, made several statements that caught investigators' attention. He demonstrated knowledge of details about the murders that hadn't been publicly released, including specific information about the location where Diane Williams' body had been found. However, despite these promising leads, investigators couldn't definitively link the Green Vega rapists to the Phantom murders. The group's known modus operandi, while violent, didn't match exactly with the Phantom's methodology. The Freeway Phantom showed a pattern of strangling victims and leaving them along highways, while the Green Vega rapists typically used weapons and committed their assaults in different locations. Another significant lead emerged when investigators began looking into Robert Askins, a computer technician with a troubling history. Askins had previously been arrested in 1938 for poisoning a woman to death, and had been accused of killing 2 other women in the 1970s. He had worked at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a mental health facility in Washington, D.C., and had a background in chemistry that made him capable of creating the poison used in his earlier crime. What made Askins particularly interesting to investigators was his connection to the area where many of the Phantom victims were found. He lived and worked near several of the dump sites and would have been familiar with the highway system. Additionally, Askins had been arrested in 1977 for rape and had a history of violence against women. However, like the Green Vega rapists, the case against Askins never materialized into anything concrete. While he remained a person of interest, investigators couldn't find enough evidence to charge him with the Phantom murders. Askins died in prison in 2010 while serving a sentence for attempted murder. The investigation was further complicated by the jurisdictional challenges involved. The murders had occurred across different police jurisdictions, including Washington, D.C., Prince George's County, and Maryland State Police territories. While there was cooperation between agencies, the multi-jurisdictional nature of the case made coordination and information sharing more complex. The FBI's involvement brought additional resources and expertise to the investigation. They developed a psychological profile of the killer, suggesting that the Phantom was likely an African-American male between 24 and 30 years old, physically strong enough to overpower his victims, but non-threatening in appearance. The profile indicated someone intelligent enough to avoid capture, and familiar enough with the area to navigate its highways and back roads with ease. The note left with Brenda Woodard's body became a particular focus of the investigation. The use of the word tantamount was interesting to investigators, as it suggested someone with a decent vocabulary and possibly some education. The fact that the killer was aware of and embraced the Freeway Phantom nickname showed they were following media coverage of their crimes. Forensic analysis of the evidence was limited by the technology available in the 1970s. While investigators collected physical evidence from the victims, including fibers and biological samples, DNA testing wasn't available at the time. In recent years, some of this evidence has been re-examined using modern techniques, but so far no matches have been found in criminal databases. The impact of these murders on the Washington, D.C. community was profound and long-lasting. Parents became more protective of their children, especially in the predominantly African-American neighborhoods where the Phantom seemed to focus his attacks. The murders highlighted racial disparities in media coverage and law enforcement response, with some community members feeling that the cases didn't receive the attention they deserved because the victims were African-American. The cases also led to changes in how missing persons reports were handled in the D.C. area. Prior to the Phantom murders, there had often been delays in investigating disappearances, particularly those involving minority children. The tragic outcomes of these cases helped push for more immediate responses to missing persons reports. Community organizations formed in response to the murders, with neighborhood watch groups and volunteer patrols becoming more common. Churches and community centers began offering safe spaces for children to gather and transportation services for young people who would otherwise have to walk alone. The investigation would eventually grow cold, but it was never officially closed. The case files remain active in multiple jurisdictions, and detectives periodically review the evidence, hoping that advances in forensic science or new information might finally help identify the Freeway Phantom. The passage of time has done little to diminish the significance of the Freeway Phantom case in Washington, D.C.'s history. In the decades since the murders, various cold case units have revisited the evidence, hoping that new technologies or investigative techniques might shed light on the killer's identity. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case that continues to draw attention is the psychological profile of the killer. The level of organization and planning demonstrated in these crimes suggests someone who was methodical and intelligent. The fact that the perpetrator was able to abduct victims from public places, hold them for periods of time, and dispose of their bodies without being caught indicates a significant degree of criminal sophistication. The phone calls made by Brenda Crockett remain particularly haunting to investigators. The killer allowing her to make these calls suggests a person who enjoyed maintaining control and possibly derived satisfaction from the psychological torment inflicted on both the victim and their family. This behavior aligns with what we now know about certain types of serial killers who seek to extend their control over their victims and their victims' families. In the 1990s, investigators began applying new forensic techniques to the evidence collected from the crime scenes. Advances in DNA analysis offered hope that a genetic profile of the killer might be developed. However, the age of the evidence and the limitations of storage methods used in the 1970s presented significant challenges. While some biological evidence was preserved, much of it had degraded over time, making DNA analysis difficult or impossible. The Metropolitan Police Department's Cold Case Unit has maintained an active interest in the case, periodically releasing new information to the public in hopes of generating fresh leads. In 2009, they released previously unpublished details about the note found with Brenda Woodard's body, including specific analysis of the handwriting and paper type. The unique word choice in the note, particularly the use of tantamount, continues to intrigue investigators, as it might indicate something about the killer's background or education level. Several retired detectives who worked on the original case have continued to pursue leads even after leaving the force. One such detective, who spent years investigating the Green Vega rapist connection, has maintained that there are still unexplored angles to that theory. He points to the geographic overlap of the crimes and the similar victim profiles as evidence that deserves further scrutiny. The case has also attracted attention from various true crime researchers and amateur investigators over the years. Some have developed new theories about potential suspects, including the possibility that the killer might have been a long-haul truck driver, explaining both the use of highways and the eventual cessation of murders in the DC area. However, like many theories in this case, this remains speculative without concrete evidence to support it. One of the more recent developments in the investigation came from a review of similar cases from the same time period. Investigators have looked into possible connections between the Freeway Phantom murders and other unsolved crimes along the eastern seaboard. While some cases showed superficial similarities, no definitive links have been established. The families of the victims have continued to advocate for justice over the years. Carol Spink's sister has been particularly vocal, regularly speaking to media outlets and working with law enforcement to keep the case in the public eye. She has emphasized how the murders changed not just the families directly affected, but an entire generation of young people in Washington, D.C. The case has also become an important study in law enforcement circles, particularly regarding the handling of serial murder investigations. The jurisdictional challenges faced by investigators in the 1970s have led to improved protocols for multi-agency cooperation in similar cases. Modern task forces dealing with serial crimes often point to the Freeway Phantom investigation as an example of why better coordination between different law enforcement agencies is crucial. The racial aspects of the case continue to resonate today. All 6 victims were young African American females, and some community activists have argued that this fact contributed to the cases receiving less attention than they deserved at the time. This perspective has led to broader discussions about how law enforcement and media handle cases involving minority victims. The locations where the bodies were found have changed significantly over the past 5 decades. Areas that were once relatively isolated spots along highways have been developed, making it harder for current investigators to fully understand the geography of the crimes as it existed in the 1970s. However, this development has also led to new theories about how the killer might have known these areas before they were developed. In 2018, the Metropolitan Police Department digitized all available case files related to the Freeway Phantom murders, making it easier for current investigators to review and cross-reference information. This process revealed several previously overlooked witness statements that are still being evaluated for potential new leads. the case has also benefited from advances in criminal profiling. Modern FBI profilers have reviewed the case files and developed updated theories about the killer's personality and motivations. While these new profiles largely align with the original assessment from the 1970s, they've added insights based on our improved understanding of serial killer psychology. The modern analysis of the Freeway Phantom case has also brought attention to several behavioral aspects that weren't fully appreciated in the 1970s. For instance, the killer's decision to leave bodies along major highways wasn't just about convenience. It demonstrated a desire for his crimes to be discovered quickly and generate public attention. This behavior suggests someone who may have derived satisfaction from the community's fear and the media coverage his crimes generated. The physical evidence from the cases has been carefully preserved over the decades. In 2019, investigators began using new DNA extraction techniques that can work with degraded samples. While the results of these tests haven't been publicly released, the possibility of developing a usable DNA profile remains one of the most promising avenues for eventually solving these crimes. One aspect that has received renewed attention is the killer's apparent knowledge of police procedures. The way the bodies were disposed of suggested someone who understood both how to avoid leaving evidence and how to ensure the victims would be found relatively quickly. This has led some investigators to revisit the theory that the killer might have had some connection to law enforcement or security work. The timeline of the murders has also been scrutinized more closely in recent years. The fact that the killing stopped abruptly in September 1972 could indicate that the killer was incarcerated for another crime, died, or moved away from the area. Investigators have cross-referenced prison records from that period, looking for individuals who were incarcerated around the time the murders stopped and who fit the general profile of the suspect. The Metropolitan Police Department has maintained a dedicated tip line for the case, and it still receives calls periodically. While many of these tips don't lead anywhere substantial, each one is investigated thoroughly. In 2020, a tip led investigators to review archival footage from a local television station that had covered the original murders, revealing previously unknown details about potential witnesses. The case has also benefited from advances in geographic profiling. Modern analysts have used computer modeling to study the locations where victims were abducted and where their bodies were found, creating a more detailed picture of the killer's comfort zone. This analysis suggests the perpetrator likely lived or worked in the southeastern part of Washington, D.C. during the time of the murders. One of the more intriguing recent developments has been the discovery of old police logs from the period, which documented suspicious vehicles seen in the areas where victims were abducted. While these records were known to exist, some had been misplaced over the years. Their recovery has provided new details about vehicles that were considered suspicious at the time, but were never fully investigated. The case has also attracted attention from forensic linguists, who have studied the note left with Brenda Woodard's body. Their analysis suggests that the killer was likely educated beyond high school level, based on vocabulary and sentence structure. The use of the word tantamount continues to be particularly interesting, as it's not a commonly used word and might indicate someone with specific educational or professional background. The Freeway Phantom case remains one of Washington, D.C.'s most notorious unsolved crimes. While the passage of time has made solving the case more challenging, it has also provided new tools and perspectives that weren't available to the original investigators. The combination of advanced forensic techniques, improved behavioral analysis, and continued public interest means that the possibility of identifying the Freeway Phantom still exists. For the families of Carol Spinks, Darlenia Johnson, Brenda Crockett, Nenemoshia Yates, Brenda Woodard, and Diane Williams, the wait for justice continues. Their stories serve as a reminder of a dark chapter in Washington, D.C.'s history, and their cases remain active, waiting for the breakthrough that might finally reveal the identity of the Freeway Phantom. The impact of the Freeway Phantom case continues to influence modern law enforcement practices and community awareness. In recent years, the Metropolitan Police Department has implemented new protocols for handling similar cases, directly influenced by lessons learned from this investigation. These protocols emphasize rapid response to missing persons reports, especially involving young victims, and immediate cross-jurisdictional communication. Cold case investigators have also begun employing artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to analyze the vast amount of data collected during the original investigation. These tools can identify patterns and connections that might have been missed by human investigators, particularly when dealing with cases spanning multiple jurisdictions and time periods. The case has also sparked important discussions about evidence preservation. Many departments now use the Freeway Phantom case as an example when training officers on proper evidence collection and storage procedures. The challenges faced in analyzing degraded evidence from these murders have led to improved protocols for maintaining physical evidence in long-term storage, particularly in cases where DNA testing might be crucial years or decades later. Recent interviews with retired officers who worked the case have revealed previously unpublished details about potential suspects who were investigated but never publicly named. While these individuals were ultimately ruled out, the investigative techniques used to clear them have provided valuable insights for modern investigators working on similar cases. The geographical aspects of the case have been further analyzed using modern mapping technology. Investigators have created detailed computer models showing how the DC area's highway system has changed since the 1970s, helping them better understand the killer's possible travel patterns and knowledge of the area at the time of the murders. Community organizations in Washington, D.C. continue to honor the memories of the 6 victims through various initiatives. Annual vigils are held, and several youth safety programs have been established in their names. These programs focus on teaching personal safety, while also addressing the broader issues of racial disparities in media coverage and law enforcement response to missing persons cases. The case remains open, and investigators continue to follow new leads as they emerge. The Metropolitan Police Department maintains that advances in forensic science, combined with the possibility of deathbed confessions or other new information, mean that the case could still be solved. Until then, the identity of the Freeway Phantom remains one of Washington, D.C.'s most enduring mysteries, and the 6 young victims remain a powerful reminder of the importance of continued vigilance and community awareness. The legacy of the Freeway Phantom case extends beyond its immediate impact on law enforcement and the community. It has become a crucial case study in criminal justice programs, highlighting the importance of preservation of evidence, interagency cooperation, and the evolution of investigative techniques. Most importantly, it serves as a reminder that behind every unsolved case are families still waiting for answers, communities forever changed by violence, and the enduring hope that justice, though delayed, might still be served.